The silence in Hangar 4 was a heavy, suffocating thing. It was the silence of failure, a dead quiet that felt more menacing than the roar of any jet engine. Within this cathedral of advanced composites and classified technology, the B-2 Spirit bomber, call sign Nightfall, rested like a prehistoric bird brought down by an invisible poison. It was a $2 billion masterpiece of aeronautical engineering, a flying wing that could whisper its way through the most sophisticated air defenses on the planet. But now it was grounded, crippled by a ghost. A vibration. It started as a subtle tremor in the port engine nacelle, a flutter on the diagnostic screens that was initially dismissed as sensor noise. But as the throttle advanced past 60%, that whisper became a scream. A catastrophic harmonic resonance that threatened to shake the multi-million-dollar airframe into a cascade of delaminating carbon fiber. For 3 weeks, the brightest minds the Air Force could muster had descended upon Whiteman Air Force Base. They were a new generation of aerospace engineers, armed with quantum oscilloscopes, laser vibrometers, and terabytes of computational fluid dynamics simulations. They dismantled and reassembled the General Electric F-118 turbofan engine a dozen times. They X-rayed every spar, analyzed every composite panel, and recalibrated every sensor down to the micron. Yet they found nothing. Absolutely nothing. The machine was, by every digital measure, perfect. But the ghost remained. General Markham, a man whose face was a roadmap of command decisions and sleepless nights, stood before the silent bomber, his hands clasped behind his back. Beside him, Dr. Eris Finch, the civilian lead of the diagnostic team, gestured impotently at a holographic display showing a flat line where an anomaly should be. Finch was the epitome of modern brilliance, young, sharp, and dripping with an arrogance born of Ivy League credentials and a complete faith in the infallibility of data. "General, the numbers don't lie," Finch said, his tone a polished blend of frustration and condescension. "The airframe is structurally sound. The engine components are all within 1 sigma tolerance. The vibration simply shouldn't exist. It's a phantom. We're recommending a full engine swap, but frankly, without knowing the root cause, we're just throwing a $100 million dart in the dark." Markham's gaze drifted from the display to the colossal aircraft. It looked wounded, its dark, matte skin absorbing the hangar lights like a black hole. Scrapping it was unthinkable, a political and financial disaster. But flying it was suicide. He felt the crushing weight of a problem that defied solution. It was then that Master Sergeant Cole, a veteran crew chief who had been with the Spirit program since its inception, cleared his throat. "Sir," Cole began, his voice hesitant. "There might be another option. A name I haven't heard in a long time." Finch turned, an eyebrow arched in amusement. "Another software suite? A new diagnostic AI?" "We've run them all, Sergeant." Cole shook his head, his eyes fixed on the general. "Not a what, sir?" "A who." "A man. His name is Elias Thorne." The name hung in the air, unrecognized by Finch and his team of young prodigies. But General Markham's posture stiffened. He remembered the name from old program files, a footnote in the bomber's development history. Elias Thorne. A master mechanic, a designer from the analog age who had been instrumental in solving resonant stress issues during the prototype phase. He was pushed into early retirement 2 decades ago, deemed an anachronism in the dawning age of digital design and diagnostics. His methods were considered unconventional. More art than science. Thorne? Markham mused, the name tasting of rust and forgotten genius. "Is he still around?" "Lives in a small workshop up in the Ozarks, sir," Cole affirmed. "They say he can still hear the stress in a metal joint just by tapping on it." Finch let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Hear the stress? General, with all due respect, we are using spectrum analyzers that can detect atomic-level dissonance. You can't seriously be considering bringing in some retired grease monkey, a witch doctor, to solve a problem that has baffled the most advanced diagnostic systems on Earth." General Markham turned his cold, tired eyes on the brilliant young doctor. He saw the pride, the utter certainty that if his technology couldn't find the problem, no problem existed. And in that moment, faced with an impossible choice, Markham made a decision that defied all modern logic. "Find him," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Get Elias Thorne." The phone call reached Elias Thorne in a workshop that smelled of cedar shavings and ionized air from an old arc welder. It was a place out of time, where meticulously maintained lathes and milling machines from the 1950s stood alongside oscilloscopes with glowing green cathode ray tubes. Elias, a man with silver hair and hands that bore the intricate cartography of a lifetime of making and mending, was in the middle of restoring a vintage vacuum tube amplifier. He listened patiently to the urgent voice on the other end of the line, his expression unreadable. He had not set foot on an Air Force base in 20 years. They had made it clear his kind of thinking was no longer welcome, a relic of a bygone era. They had their computers now, their infallible simulations. But a machine, one of his machines, was hurting. The B-2 was more than just a weapon to him. He had helped shape its wings, tune its frame, and give it voice. It was a part of his soul, left to the care of men who could read its data but could no longer hear its song. He looked at his gnarled fingers, then at the receiver. "I'll be there in the morning," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble, and hung up. The decision was not one of pride or vindication. It was the simple, undeniable duty a creator feels for his creation. His arrival at Whiteman was an exercise in contrasts. Elias Thorne drove up to the main gate in a meticulously restored but 30-year-old pickup truck, its engine purring with a smoothness that defied its age. He wore simple denim trousers and a flannel shirt, carrying a small, worn leather case that looked like it might hold a doctor's instruments from a century ago. The airman at the gate, accustomed to sleek sedans and crisp uniforms, regarded him with confused suspicion until his clearance was confirmed by the base commander himself. As he was escorted into Hangar 4, the vast, sterile environment seemed to recoil from his analog presence. A group of young engineers, acolytes of Dr. Finch, stopped their work to stare. They saw not a legendary mechanic, but a frail old man who seemed to have wandered in from a farm auction. Their whispers and stifled smirks followed him like a vapor trail. Dr. Finch met him at the foot of the bomber, a tablet in his hand and a practiced, dismissive smile on his face. "Mr. Thorne? An honor," he said, the words dripping with insincerity. "Welcome to the 21st century. We've prepared a full diagnostic brief for you. 30 petabytes of sensor data, airflow simulations, stress test results." Elias barely glanced at the tablet Finch offered. His eyes, a pale but startlingly clear blue, were fixed on the wounded giant before him. He saw past the radar-absorbent skin and the complex machinery. He saw the tension in its lines, the weary droop of its wings that only a man who knew its soul could perceive. He raised a hand, not in greeting, but to gently touch the leading edge of the wing. His touch was a caress, a silent communion. "She's in pain," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Finch's smile tightened. "The aircraft isn't it, Mr. Thorne? And its pain, as you call it, is a multi-spectrum vibrational anomaly we have been unable to quantify. Perhaps you'd like to see the data feeds." "No," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. He began to walk the perimeter of the aircraft, his pace slow and deliberate. His gaze swept over every surface, every seam, every access panel. He was not looking at the machine, he was observing it, absorbing its state of being. The engineers watched, their mockery turning to baffled curiosity. They were used to a frantic ballet of laptops and diagnostic probes. This slow, silent ritual was alien to them. "I need it quiet," Elias said, his voice carrying unexpectedly in the cavernous space. "Completely quiet. Shut down the ventilation, the auxiliary power units, everything." Finch was about to protest, to lecture on the necessity of climate control for the sensitive electronics, but a sharp look from General Markham, who stood watching from the gantry above, silenced him. The order was given. One by one, the humming systems of the hangar fell silent. The great bay doors were sealed. A profound, almost sacred stillness descended, broken only by the distant Missouri wind sighing against the building. The team of engineers stood awkwardly, their digital tools rendered useless, their world of noise and data reduced to a waiting silence. They traded glances, a mixture of impatience and unease. This wasn't science. It was theater. And they were an unwilling audience to a performance they could not comprehend. Elias stood at the nose of the B-2, his eyes closed, his head tilted slightly. He was listening. Not with his ears alone, but with a craftsman's intuition honed over 60 years. He was listening for the discord in the symphony of the machine, the single, silent, broken note that their sensors could not detect. He was listening to the memory of the stress, the ghost of the vibration that lingered in the very molecules of the airframe. The minutes stretched into an hour. The young engineers grew restless, fidgeting and checking their smartwatches. Finch paced near the command station, his frustration a palpable force in the room. He saw this as an indulgence, a pathetic waste of time to appease a general clutching at straws. He saw an old man performing a folksy ritual, an act of technological blasphemy in this temple of modern science. He leaned over to his lead technician. "Run a background check on this guy," he whispered. "I want to know which asylum they pulled him out of." But high on the gantry, General Markham watched Elias with an intensity that had replaced his skepticism. He had seen men of action his whole life, but this was something different. This was a man of profound and patient perception, and in the absolute stillness he commanded, the general began to feel a sliver of something he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. After what felt like an eternity, Elias opened his eyes. He walked to the small leather case he'd set down beside the landing gear and unfastened the tarnished brass clasps. The engineers leaned in, expecting some forgotten, arcane diagnostic tool, a strange brass contraption of gears and dials. Instead, Elias Thorne produced a single object. It was a steel tuning fork, its finish worn to a dull pewter sheen from countless years of use. It was simple, elegant, and utterly, laughably archaic. A ripple of disbelief spread through the assembled technicians. One of them, a young Caltech graduate, snorted with derisive laughter before quickly stifling it. Dr. Finch stepped forward, his face a mask of triumphant scorn. He had been waiting for this moment, the final, irrefutable proof of the old man's madness. "A tuning fork?" he said, his voice loud, projecting to every corner of the silent hangar. "Are you serious? Are we tuning a grand piano or a multi-role strategic bomber, Mr. Thorne? This has gone far enough. General, I must insist." Elias paid him no mind. He held the fork as if it were a sacred object. He turned and walked toward the port side of the aircraft, directly beneath the massive engine nacelle where the vibration was born. He tapped the tines of the fork gently against the rubber heel of his work boot. A pure, clear note, a perfect A at 440 Hz, resonated through the still air. The sound was clean, beautiful, and achingly simple against the backdrop of immense technological complexity. Then, with a surgeon's steadiness, he brought the vibrating fork close to the bomber's composite skin, his head tilted, his eyes once again closed in intense concentration. He was using the pure tone as a probe, a wave of perfect harmony sent into a system that contained a hidden dissonance. He was listening for the echo of imperfection. He began a slow, methodical search. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of infinite patience. Tap. Hum. Listen. Move 1 inch. Tap. Hum. Listen. He worked his way along the engine cowling, a grid search performed not by laser and computer, but by ear and instinct. The pure note of the fork would ring out, and Elias would listen to the way the sound died as it was absorbed and reflected by the structure. To the onlookers, it was a bizarre, almost mystical pantomime. They heard nothing but the fading tone of the fork. But Elias heard more. He heard the subtle variations in decay, the almost imperceptible dampening and reflection that told him the story of the materials beneath the skin. Finch's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is a farce," he hissed to the general, who had descended from the gantry to observe more closely. "He's putting on a show. We're wasting critical time, sir. Every minute this aircraft is on the ground costs the taxpayers a fortune." "Be quiet, Doctor," Markham commanded, his voice a low growl. He was no longer watching a charlatan, he was witnessing a master at work. The initial absurdity of the scene had melted away, replaced by a hypnotic tension. The entire hangar seemed to be holding its collective breath, caught in the rhythm of the old man's search. Tap. Hum. Listen. The supporting cast of engineers, once so quick to mock, were now silent, their smirks replaced by expressions of rapt confusion. They couldn't understand what he was doing, but the sheer, unwavering focus of the old mechanic was undeniable. It was the focus of a man who was not guessing, but methodically tracking his quarry. He was a hunter, and the ghost in the machine was his prey. The air grew thick with anticipation, the silence no longer empty, but charged with the possibility of revelation. Hours crawled by. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the tuning fork and the soft scuff of Elias's boots on the polished concrete floor. The sun set, and the powerful hangar lights cast long, distorted shadows, making the B-2 look even more like a creature from another world. Finch had slumped into a chair at his console, defeated into silence by the general's unwavering gaze. The team of engineers now stood in a loose semicircle, their arms crossed, their skepticism warring with a strange, burgeoning respect. They were watching something that defied every principle of their training, yet they could not look away. Elias showed no signs of fatigue. He was a pillar of concentration, a seismograph of one, detecting tremors no machine could register. He had moved from the exterior cowling to an open access panel inside the engine bay, a space crammed with wires, hydraulic lines, and actuators. Tap. Hum. Listen. He moved the fork past bundles of wiring and titanium conduits. The note remained pure. Tap. Hum. Listen. He traced the lines of a fuel pump assembly. The note was clean. Then he stopped. His body went rigid. He was positioned near the base of the massive turbine assembly, near the complex array of mounts that secured the multi-ton engine to the airframe itself. He tapped the fork again, the note singing out in the confined space. He brought the tines to within a millimeter of a single, innocuous bolt head, one of thousands that held the machine together. And the sound changed. It was an almost imperceptible shift, a change so subtle that no one else in the hangar could have possibly detected it. But in the focused world of Elias Thorne, it was a thunderclap. The pure, resonant hum of the fork was corrupted. A dissonant buzz, a tiny, grating parasitic vibration, leached into the note, turning it sour. It was the acoustic signature of a flaw, a sympathetic resonance from something that was not in harmony with the whole. Elias's eyes, which had been closed for hours, snapped open. They were alight with the fire of discovery. "Here," he said. His voice was a quiet rasp, but it cut through the silence like a diamond. He did not shout. He did not exclaim. He simply stated a fact he now knew with absolute certainty. He pointed a steady, callous finger. "It's here." Finch surged to his feet, rushing over to the engine bay. "What is it? A fracture? A material flaw?" He peered at the bolt Elias indicated, his diagnostic eye seeing nothing out of the ordinary. It looked identical to the 100 other bolts surrounding it. "No," Elias said, his voice calm. "It's the tension. This bolt. It's off. By less than the weight of a breath on a spider's web. Too tight. It's creating a pressure point, a microscopic deformation in the mount casing. You can't see it. Your sensors can't read it. But it's there. And at a specific engine frequency, it sings the wrong note. It throws the entire assembly out of tune." Finch scoffed, his arrogance rushing back to fill the vacuum of his confusion. "That's impossible. Every single one of these bolts was torqued by a calibrated robotic arm. We have the data. They are perfect to within a 10,000th of a pound-foot. Our sensors would have." Elias slowly turned to face the young doctor. For the first time, the gentle, quiet demeanor was gone, replaced by a flash of unyielding authority, the steel of a master craftsman who will not have his work questioned. He held up a hand, and Finch's diatribe died in his throat. "Your machine torqued the bolt," Elias stated simply. It did not listen to it. He turned to Master Sergeant Cole. I need a calibrated torque wrench. An analog one. Beam scale. Not a digital strain gauge. A younger technician looked bewildered, having never seen such a tool. But Cole nodded, a deep understanding in his eyes. He knew what Elias was asking for. It was a tool of feel, of touch, not of digital readout. He disappeared into a deep storage cage and returned minutes later with a long, slender wrench, its measurement scale etched into the polished steel beam. It was an antique, but like everything Cole maintained, it was in perfect condition. Elias took the wrench, his movements precise and economical. He fit the socket onto the offending bolt. The entire hangar crew, from General Markham down to the lowest-ranking airman, leaned in, their collective gaze fixed on that single point. This was the moment of truth. The culmination of the old man's strange ritual. Elias grasped the handle of the wrench. There was no grunt of exertion, no dramatic turn. He applied a minuscule, almost imperceptible amount of pressure in the loosening direction. A tiny, metallic sigh, a click so faint it was more felt than heard, broke the silence. He had moved it no more than a hair's breadth. He then removed the wrench. He stepped back from the engine bay, his work finished. He looked at General Markham, his gaze level and clear. Start her up, he said softly. Take her all the way. The world seemed to pause. Then, the order was given. The auxiliary power unit whined to life. The flight technicians in the cockpit began the engine start sequence. A low rumble began, growing steadily into the familiar, soul-shaking roar of a turbofan engine. On the main screen, the digital readouts for Engine 1 began to climb. 10% thrust. 20. 30. The hangar floor began to tremble. Everyone braced themselves. This was the zone where the ghost had always appeared. 40%. 50. The roar intensified. 60%. This was the threshold. The moment of failure. The air was thick with tension. But the catastrophic, airframe-shredding vibration did not come. There was nothing. 70%. 80. The roar was a physical force now, pressing on their chests. Still nothing but the clean, raw, perfectly balanced power of the engine. 90. 100%. The B-2's F-118 engine was at full military thrust, screaming its defiance inside the enclosed hangar, a sound of unimaginable power. And it was flawless. The silence where the catastrophic vibration should have been was deafening, a void of failure that was now filled with the triumphant thunder of a perfectly tuned machine. For a long moment after the engine spooled down, no one moved. The engineers, the technicians, even the general, stood frozen, their faces masks of stunned, uncomprehending awe. The sudden return to relative quiet was jarring, leaving their ears ringing with the echo of pure power. Dr. Finch, his face pale and slack-jawed, was the first to break the spell. He stumbled toward his main diagnostic console like a man in a trance, his hands shaking as he keyed in commands, desperate for his data to refute what his senses had just witnessed. The screen before him, which had always shown a storm of red-lined error codes past 60% thrust, now displayed a sea of placid, uniform green. All readings were nominal. All systems were perfect. The anomaly, the ghost that had haunted them for weeks, was gone. It had never been a phantom. It had simply been a secret that their machines were not equipped to hear. General Markham walked slowly toward Elias, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He stopped before the old mechanic, the gold stars on his shoulders seeming less bright than the quiet wisdom in Elias's eyes. The general, a man who commanded fleets of billion-dollar aircraft, looked at the man in the flannel shirt with a respect that bordered on reverence. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "After all our technology, all our experts, how did you know?" Elias Thorne's gaze drifted from the general to the great, dark aircraft he had just healed. A flicker of deep, paternal affection crossed his features. "Every machine has a voice, General," he said, his tone simple and direct, devoid of any hint of arrogance. "A song. When it's built right and treated right, It sings in harmony. This one, she had a single note, one tiny screw, that was pulled too tight, singing just sharp of the rest of the choir. He looked at the bank of lifeless monitors and then at the bewildered faces of Finch's team. You were all shouting at her with numbers and processors, trying to force her to tell you her problem. All she needed was for someone to be quiet enough to listen to her whisper. He patted the worn leather case that held his tuning fork. This doesn't find the flaw, he said. It just helps you listen better. In the days that followed, a quiet but seismic shift occurred at Whiteman Air Force Base. Dr. Eris Finch was gone, reassigned to a remote atmospheric research post in the alkali flats of Nevada, his meteoric career permanently grounded. His fall from grace was as swift as it was silent, a cautionary tale against the sin of pride. The story of the tuner, the old man who had fixed the unfixable with a simple tuning fork, quickly became the stuff of legend, whispered in maintenance bays and ready rooms, a modern myth reminding a new generation that data was not the same as wisdom. General Marham personally drafted a multi-million-dollar consultancy offer for Elias Thorne, creating a new post for him, Master Diagnostician for the entire B-2 fleet, a position of honor and authority. Elias received the offer in his workshop, amidst the scent of cedar and soldering flux. He read the official letter, a faint smile touching his lips. He wrote a short, polite reply, and mailed it back. He declined. He hadn't returned for glory, or for money, or for the vindication of seeing the arrogant brought low. His actions were not born of a desire to prove the old ways were better than the new. He had simply come because a machine he loved was in pain, and he was the only one left who spoke its language. His reward was not in a contract or a title. It was in the knowledge that his creation was whole again. Weeks later, standing on the porch of his secluded home in the Ozarks, he looked up at the twilight sky. High above, a dark, familiar shape, impossibly thin and silent, soared across the stratosphere, a black chevron against the deep purple of dusk. It was nightfall, flying true and in perfect harmony. And Elias Thorne, the man who listened to the whispers of steel, allowed himself a small, satisfied nod before turning back to the simple, honest work that awaited him on his bench.